Welcome to RankLens. Today, we count down the top 10 highest-grossing movies of all time. 10 films, billions of dollars, one global leaderboard. Tonight, we're counting down the highest-grossing movies of all time, ranked by worldwide box office takings in US dollars. From dinosaur theme parks to superhero showdowns, from sinking ocean liners to alien jungles glowing blue. These 10 titles didn't just sell tickets, they rewrote what a global blockbuster can earn. We start at number 10 and work our way up to the single film that sits alone at the very top. At number 10, Jurassic World, pulling in around $2 billion at the global box office. This was the film that revived the Jurassic Park franchise after a 14-year gap. 14 years. A whole generation of fans had grown up waiting to step back onto Isla Nublar. And in June 2015, director Colin Trevorrow finally opened the gates. What audiences found was a fully operational dinosaur resort, slick, corporate, and ready to go catastrophically wrong. Chris Pratt led the cast as a Raptor trainer, alongside Bryce Dallas Howard as the park's polished operations manager. Together, they anchored a summer blockbuster that proved nostalgia, when paired with spectacle, can turn into a $2 billion global phenomenon. At number 9, Inside Out 2, also clearing the $2 billion mark worldwide. This Pixar sequel returned us to the headquarters inside Riley's mind, the same emotional control room audiences fell for in the original. Only this time, Riley is older, and her emotions have new, more complicated company to deal with. Released in June 2024, the film arrived at a moment when many had written off animated theatrical releases entirely. Instead, Inside Out 2 single-handedly revived theatrical animation demand. Families poured back into multiplexes, ticket after ticket, day after day. By the time the dust settled, it had become Pixar's highest-grossing film worldwide, a stunning peak for a studio that has been redefining animation for nearly 3 decades. At number 8, Spider-Man: No Way Home, another $2 billion global haul. This was the movie that did the impossible. For the first time on the big screen, 3 Spider-Men shared the frame. Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and Tom Holland, 3 generations of the web-slinger, finally together. Released in December 2021, it landed right in the middle of the ongoing pandemic recovery, when no one really knew if audiences would come back to cinemas in those numbers again. They did. They lined up around the block. The film became the highest-grossing collaboration to date between Sony and Marvel Studios, 2 partners who built the modern Spider-Man on the screen together. At number 7, Avengers: Infinity War, also at the $2 billion mark. This was the film that finally pulled back the curtain on Marvel's biggest villain, Thanos. After years of teases and post-credit hints, 2018 was the year Marvel introduced Thanos as its full-scale cinematic antagonist. Directed by Anthony and Joe Russo, the film stitched together more than a decade of storytelling into a single, sprawling event. Heroes from every corner of the Marvel Cinematic Universe were forced into the same fight, on the same losing side. Audiences left theaters stunned by the ending. And that was the whole point. Infinity War existed to set up the climactic events that would later be resolved in Avengers: Endgame. At number 6, Star Wars: The Force Awakens, another $2 billion entry on this list. This was a turning point for the saga itself. It was the first Star Wars film released under Disney's ownership of Lucasfilm, a brand new chapter for one of the most beloved franchises in cinema history. Directed by J.J. Abrams and released in December 2015, the film leaned heavily into nostalgia while opening the door to a new generation of heroes. And the audience response was historic. The Force Awakens still holds the record for the biggest North American opening weekend ever recorded. Fans didn't just show up, They showed up in numbers that no other film, before or since, has matched in those crucial first 3 days of release. At number 5, Ne Zha 2, clearing $2 billion at the global box office. This is the most surprising entry on this entire list. Ne Zha 2 is a Chinese animated sequel based on the investiture of the gods, one of the great mythological epics of classical Chinese literature. It opened during the 2025 Lunar New Year, the single biggest movie-going window on the Chinese calendar, and absolutely dominated it. Tickets sold out across thousands of screens, day after day, week after week. What makes its rise so unique is the source of that money. The vast majority of Ne Zha 2's revenue came from domestic Chinese audiences alone. Proof that a single domestic market at this scale can now propel a film into the global all-time top 10. At number 4, Titanic, also clearing $2 billion worldwide. Directed by James Cameron and released in December 1997, this is one of the oldest films on the list and arguably the most culturally seismic. When Titanic opened, it didn't just sell tickets, it kept selling them week after week, month after month, for more than half a year. At the Oscars, it took home 11 Academy Awards, tying the all-time record. But the most staggering achievement may be its box office longevity. Titanic held the all-time gross record for over a decade. For more than 10 years, no other film on Earth could touch what Cameron's epic had done, until Cameron himself came back to break his own record. At number 3, Avatar, The Way of Water, also at the $2 billion tier. This was the long-awaited Avatar sequel, released in December 2022, a full 13 years after the original. 13 years is a lifetime in modern Hollywood. Most franchises don't survive a gap that long. But James Cameron used those years. He pushed underwater motion capture technology to places it had never gone before, creating the immersive Pandora oceans the film is built around. Every glowing reef, every leviathan, every plunge into the depths, built on tech that didn't exist when the first Avatar was made. And the result confirms something Hollywood had been quietly unsure about. Avatar wasn't a one-off. The franchise is a global theatrical juggernaut, and it is here to stay. At number 2, Avengers: Endgame, pulling in roughly $3 billion at the global box office. This wasn't just another Marvel film. This was the finale. Endgame concluded the Marvel Infinity Saga, a sprawling narrative stretched across 22 films and more than 10 years of movie making. Directed by Anthony and Joe Russo for Marvel Studios, it was the cinematic event of the decade. Audiences turned up in costume. They cried in the aisles. They came back 2, 3, 4 times. And for a brief, shining stretch, Endgame held the all-time box office crown, the biggest movie ever made by raw global dollars. Briefly, because one rival was about to come back from the past and reclaim its throne through a theatrical re-release. And at number 1, sitting alone at the very top, Avatar, the original, with roughly $3 billion at the global box office. Directed by James Cameron and released in December 2009, this is the movie that changed what audiences expected from a night at the cinema. Cameron didn't just make a hit, he pioneered modern 3D filmmaking and motion capture performance, building Pandora from the ground up with technology that the industry would spend the next decade catching up to. But the most fascinating part of Avatar's reign is what happened after Endgame briefly stole its crown. Avatar came back. Carefully timed re-releases helped push it past Endgame to reclaim the top spot. No other film has had to defend its throne quite like this, and won. So, what does this top 10 actually tell us? Look closely, and a story emerges. Sequels, revivals, and decade-spanning franchises dominate the list. Avatar, Avengers, Spider-Man, Star Wars, Jurassic Park, Inside Out. Original standalone films are increasingly rare at this altitude, with Titanic standing as a striking exception from an earlier era. And then there's Ne Zha 2, proof that the global box office is no longer just a Hollywood story. A single domestic market at the right scale can now push a film all the way into the all-time elite, and that's the top 10 highest-grossing movies of all time. If you enjoyed this countdown, subscribe to RankLens for more.